So a sovereign wealth fund, it's usually an investment vehicle that are established by governments. They exist in many countries. Obviously for Namibia, this is a first. So it's an investment vehicle basically that the government established. It's sort of an account or a fund where you put funds aside or you invest money for a dedicated purpose. So for Namibia, the fund that we're establishing will have two accounts. One is a stabilization account and the other is intergenerational, serving two purposes. One is for fiscal stabilization and the other one is saving for future generation. And the funding of those two accounts will correspond to their mandates. So basically the stabilization account will be funded from the short-term revenues of government, and those are SACCO revenues, revenues that you get. We are looking at revenue derived from renewable resources like the green hydrogen that we are talking to, whereas for the intergenerational account, which is more long-term, we want to save for future generations so that they can reap the benefit or get the benefit that we are reaping from the exploitation of non-renewable natural resources like your diamonds that we are taking out of the ground. So that would be the key source of funding. Or if we have some divestiture whereby government is selling some of public assets, we want to put aside a portion of those assets for future generations to benefit from. And overall, if at some point as a country we are running a budget surplus whereby our revenue exceeds the expenditure for a given year, whatever surplus we have for that year, we want to save a portion of it in the fund. So what we have put in the framework, we have set a threshold to say we want the government to be able to save only when our revenues are stable. So we've set a threshold to say only when our revenue exceeds 30.5% of GDP. Then these rules of saying a certain percentage of non-renewable royalties, a certain percentage of SACCO, they only kick in when we have reached a certain level of stability. So that we have already considered the sustainability component, because while you still want to put aside resources or save and safeguard your resilience as a country, you don't want to compromise your current operations. So we have built that into the framework by putting up a threshold basically such that we can only put money into the fund at a time when the country can afford to do so. So a sovereign wealth fund is basically one of those key institutions that are pillars of macroeconomic stability. So I think from a social perspective, you can rest assured as a country that it should give that some confidence that we do have some savings that have been put aside that will then be able to cushion the country and carry us during difficult times. So that's a significant benefit. Secondly, the funds will be invested in foreign assets. So that will count as part of our foreign reserves as a country, and that serves as a key indicator that most investors look at in terms of giving them confidence to want to invest into a country. So we also feel, in addition to being able to cushion us during these stressful times, it will also serve as a pillar for investor confidence that will then help us attract the much needed investments to boost our economy. Absolutely, I think we do believe in the model. So we have done background research, looked at the different countries. Like we said, we've done benchmarking with Chile, we've looked at Botswana, we've looked at the sovereign wealth fund in Norway, and we've looked at the benefits and the macroeconomic implications that the establishment of those funds has had on those economy. And we do believe the model that we have chosen and the structure that we are putting in place is something that will be beneficial to the Namibian economy. It's never too late to save, and I think today is always the best time to save, right? Of course, it would have been better had we started the fund a few years earlier, but it's never too late to start saving. I think the one thing that the current difficult economic conditions have done, it's basically display why it's important actually for a country to have fiscal buffers such as a sovereign wealth fund, because had we had this fund set up a few years ago, we would have been able to tap from it to supplement our COVID expenditure, or when the SACCO revenue started declining, or when commodity prices started going down, we would have something to supplement our budget. So now is actually the right time, because it's when it's most apparent why we need institutions of this nature. So the fund, at the moment, we have set it up under the Bank of Namibia Act, but that's just an interim solution, interim arrangement. We do have a draft bill that currently I'm undertaking stakeholder consultations for input, and in that bill, we are basically putting up what we are calling fund rules. So you have investment rules, at what point do money flow into the sovereign wealth fund, and we also have withdrawal rules. When can you withdraw? And the rules are different for each of the two accounts, and those rules are clearly stipulated, and they clearly outline that one, the government cannot use the fund as collateral to borrow. The fund itself cannot borrow. No company can borrow from the fund. So the law that we are putting in place is really something to safeguard the assets that will be held into the fund, so that they can only be utilized for those two specified objectives. One, saving for future generation, and the second one, fiscal stabilization. So no company can borrow against the fund. It can only be used specifically for those two objectives. And you would see when we bring out the draft law that even for fiscal stabilization, it has to be under specific conditions. You cannot, just because the government is running a budget deficit, then you would like to withdraw from the fund. There has to be, for a certain number of years, you run a deficit, and it has to be because of certain type of shocks. It cannot just be because we want to spend, then I go to the fund to get money. So there will be strict mechanism and withdrawal rules around the operations of the fund.